This morning we have a special guest that's with us, and he and his family were with us a couple of weeks ago, and we had the opportunity to pray over them. Many of you who are in our Bema groups are very familiar with Marty Solomon and his ministry, Impact College Ministries, that are in schools, I will say around the country, but they're not quite down here yet, to our chagrin. Although maybe one day, and maybe one of these kids one day will decide that this is a ministry for them. But we had the opportunity, Ashley and I had the opportunity talking about Bema to meet with Becker Bullard, and he and his family had just moved back to North Georgia after being on the mission field for a number of years. And they were preparing to find their next placement in ministry with Impact Campus Ministries. And I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll let him share some more of that, but they are rapidly reaching the place where they're about to move to Utah to begin their time there. And I asked Becker if he would like to come. He's going to continue our series on the Gospel of Mark, but also share about the ministry that he is in, and an opportunity, if you would like to learn more about partnering with them, he's going to share some of that as well. It just so happened that the week that was good for them is the week that's talking about the beheading of John the Baptist. So I'm very excited to see what he does with that. That's a fun one. It's always fun when you don't know the crowd too, because you don't know what to say if you're going to hurt somebody's feelings or offend them. But some of the places that he and his family have been have experienced far more hardship for followers of Jesus than any of us have. So I know that he speaks with a heart of compassion and a heart of experience as well. Yeah, if you're in Kidmo, you can head on up, follow Jimmy, waving his arms over there. So if you're in elementary school, you can head on up with him. All right? They're coming from all sides, Jimmy. From the air and from the ground. I don't know what that means. So without further ado, I want to welcome Becker. Would you all just welcome him to Journey as he shares with us? And we're excited about the ministry that they are embarking on as well.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Is this working? I don't use these often, so this is kind of a trial run for me. But good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much, Pastor Mark and Journey. This is one of my favorite things to do in the world, is to come and talk with people about the Bible and look at it and learn from it together. So it's always my idea of a good time to get with a group of people, read the text, and see what God has for us and how it could shape our life as we go from here. And also I get to do something, in addition to my favorite thing, I get to also be here representing Impact Campus Ministries. If any of you are involved in the Bema discussion groups, that's a ministry of Impact Campus Ministries and kind of Marty's Bible teaching curriculum that he used to do when he was a campus minister, and now that we in Impact get to do with students, kind of all across the nation, not quite in the South, but there's an Impact group in Florida, so maybe slowly they'll make their way to Tennessee and Georgia. But today I'm just going to carry on with where we have been in Mark. I'm not known for being brief in my speaking. I usually take more time than I'm given. So in order to hopefully get you guys out of here by lunch and not keep you to dinner, we're just going to dive in, if that sounds good for everyone. I'll talk a little bit, I guess, about setting the scene and the story so far, because you guys have been in Mark for a number of weeks, and maybe you'll miss some weeks here and there. So by way of really quick recap, the good news account of Mark is about who Jesus is and what he's come to do. And in the first half of Mark, there's this question in the air of who is Jesus? And we as the readers, we already know the answer because Mark tells us in chapter 1, verse 1, right at the beginning. He says, "This is the good news account of Jesus, who is the Messiah, who is the Son of God." And then the rest of the first half of Mark, he's going to be showing, both in Jesus' teaching and in Jesus' miracles, how he is Israel's Messiah and how he is the Son of God who's come to save the world. Throughout the first half of Mark, you get all these people who are guessing at the identity of Jesus, who are questioning and wondering about the identity of Jesus. The disciples ask, "Who is this that even the wind and waves obey him?" Those who need the help and the power of Jesus ask, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us." Even the demons recognize who he is, Son of the Most High. So this question of Jesus' identity is kind of a key theme of the first half of Mark, and we're going to see some more of that today. In last week, I think, as you guys were studying Mark, Jesus was in his hometown of Nazareth teaching and seeking to do the miracles that he had been doing, but what he saw in his hometown was a complete lack of faith, and he saw rejection and opposition in his hometown. So although his ministry is going out with authority and power, there's kind of a growing rejection and a growing opposition to who he is and to what he is doing in bringing the kingdom. So, as Jesus is rejected in his hometown, he then shifts his focus to the surrounding villages in the Galilee region. And that's where we're going to pick up today. So, if you have your Bibles or a phone that has a Bible on it, you can go to Mark 6. We're going to start at verse 6, part B, and then go through verse 30. It should be on the screen as well. I'm going to read through the whole text for today, but then we'll go back and kind of unpack the different stories. Because what we're going to see today, the camera is going to shift a little from, it's been focusing on Jesus up to this point, but now we're going to kind of see a slight shift to two different portraits of disciples of Jesus and what it looks like to go before Jesus. So kind of my working title of this teaching is The Disciples That Went Before Jesus and We Who Go After. Because I hope what we'll see in these portraits of disciples that went before Jesus is what it means for us and how we then continue to live our lives as the disciples who go after Jesus. So, Mark 6, starting in verse 6, part B. I'm reading from the Lexham English Bible, kind of a modified translation, but whatever translation you have is great. So, it says, "And he," being Jesus, "was going around among the villages teaching. And he summoned the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2. And he gave them authority over every unclean spirit. And he commanded them that they take along nothing for the journey, except only a staff, no bread, no traveler's bag, no money in their belts, but to put on sandals and not wear 2 tunics. And he said to them, whenever you enter into a house, stay there until you depart from there. And whatever places do not welcome you or listen to you, as you go out from there, shake off the dust that is on your feet for a testimony against them. And they went out and proclaimed that people should repent. And they were expelling many demons and anointing many sick people with oil and healing them. And King Herod heard it, because his name had become known. And they were saying, John, the one who baptizes, has been raised from the dead, and because of this, these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others were saying, no, he's Elijah. And still others were saying, he's a prophet, like one of the prophets. But when Herod heard it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, this one has been raised. For Herod himself had sent and arrested John and bound him in prison because of Herodias, the wife of Philip, his brother, because Herod had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not permitted for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias held a grudge against him and was wanting to kill him, but was not able to do so. For Herod was afraid of John because he knew him to be a righteous and a holy man and protected him. When Herod listened to John, he was greatly perplexed, but yet he listened to him gladly. A suitable day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders. Most of the prominent men of Galilee were there, and when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, it pleased Herod and his dinner guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. And he swore to her, anything, whatever you ask from me, I will give to you, up to half of my kingdom. So she went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? And the mother said, the head of John the Baptizer. And she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me the head of John the Baptizer on a platter immediately. And although Herod was deeply grieved, because of his oath and dinner guests, the king did not want to refuse her. So immediately the king sent an executioner and ordered him to bring John's head. The executioner went and beheaded John in the prison, and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, which the girl then gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard this, they came and took away John's corpse and placed it in a tomb. The apostles regathered to Jesus, and they reported to him everything that they had done and all that they had taught. This is the word of the Lord. So we have as I said, kind of two different portraits of the disciples that went before Jesus. That may at first glance seem disconnected, and you kind of wonder why in the middle of this story where Jesus sends out his 12 do we get to hear about what's happened in the past with John and his execution. Then for at the end of this story, for the apostles to return to Jesus and kind of recap their trip. So the stories seem disconnected maybe on first read. At least that's what I thought about a week ago when I was asked to teach these two stories together. But I hope what I can show is that Mark, as he was writing this account, knew what he was doing, and I think put these stories next to each other, these two portraits, in order to kind of show a more complete picture of what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. So first, let's look at the first portrait, kind of the shorter one. This is the 12 that are sent out to the Galilean villages surrounding Nazareth. I'm going to tell you a story about how not to apply this text, a cautionary tale from my own life. So that you know how we shouldn't read this text, and then hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about what this text may be actually trying to tell us. So when I was a freshman in college, I was doing a study abroad program. We did a semester in Kansas City, where I went to college, and then we would do a semester overseas. There's all kind of different locations you could get placed in, and I ended up in a small country in the Middle East and lived with about 5 other guys who we were studying Arabic together, we were doing our schoolwork, and we were also going out and trying to tell people about Jesus. The country we were in was over 99% Muslims, so it seemed like there was plenty of work to do, and we were a few guys with a few months in order to do whatever God wanted to do through us. And me and one of my roommates, we read this text, and inspired by the story of the disciples going out, we decided this was our calling. This is what we got to do. So we made a plan. We picked the surrounding villages around where we were living. We left behind our wallets, our phones, kind of everything that you would think you should bring with you on a trip, because we said, we're going to do this. We're going to strap on our sandals. We're going to go village to village. We're going to proclaim the kingdom. If God wanted to do miracles through us, that would be super cool, but we just want to go and kind of follow this example. And yeah, you should never trust the biblical interpretation maybe of a freshman in college, but here I was leading the charge in this mission. So we go out there, and after a few hours of being in a village, talking with people, getting to share our testimonies or getting to share the gospel, it becomes apparent that we have about an hour of sunlight left, and no one had invited us into their home. So at this point, we're getting a little nervous. If you know anything about kind of the Arabian desert, very hot by day, extremely cold by night. So we kind of realized if we're going to be able to make it through the night, it doesn't look like anyone's inviting us in, no people of peace. We felt a little uncomfortable about brushing dust off our sandals, but we decided we need to make a fire, camp out for the night, and try again tomorrow. Thankfully, one of my roommates, the guy who came with me, he had decided last second, we should leave everything behind, but we should bring this little Chinese flip phone that we had gotten in the country, just in case. If anything happens, if there's an emergency, we're going to need help. So we had this flip phone as our kind of our backup plan, the plan B, which he put in his front pocket of his shirt. I'm not sure why that was the place he chose to put it, but it becomes important later in the story because as we decide that we're not going to be getting to stay on someone's couch or sleeping on their floor, we need to sleep in the desert somewhere. We go to the nearby gas station in the village. We bum a lighter from the guy working there, thinking with this lighter and hopefully some wood we find in the desert, we're going to make a fire. We go out into the desert. The sun is going lower and lower, so the light's getting dimmer and dimmer. The desert all looks the same, especially when there's not much sunlight. So we gather this bundle of firewood. We go back out for more. And then we wander for about 30 minutes, unable to find our first bundle of firewood. So we have to start back from scratch. We decide we're just going to carry everything with us. No more trying to get it in one location. We got arms full of wood. At this point, there is no light. We gather our wood to make this fire, to last the night, to continue the mission tomorrow. And the lighter has no fluid left in it. It's just barely a spark. So we stare at this dark pile of wood for a couple of minutes, not sure what to do, not wanting to give up on the mission, but at the same time realizing that we're not going to make it through the night if we don't have any warmth or anywhere to stay. So we decided it's time to use that phone, the thing that we had brought as like a plan B if all else fails. We're going to call our roommates back in our village we were staying in and ask them to come get us and maybe start over the mission tomorrow. My friend goes into his shirt pocket to get his phone to find out that it's gone. Somehow in the mad dash to find firewood, we had misplaced our phone. And like I said, in the desert, everything looks the same. And with no light, we knew there was no chance of finding that thing. We half-heartedly wandered around looking for about 5 minutes and decided to do the only logical thing that two college freshmen would do, and that's to get back to the highway, put our thumbs in the air, and hope to hitchhike back to our village. So finally, after getting a ride from a trucker who's headed to the capital city and our village is on the way, he drops us off. We spend a few hours walking from the outskirts to finally make it to our apartment as the sun is coming up the next day. Tired, exhausted, a little confused at the mission failed because we thought we were doing the thing. We're following the rabbi. We're doing what he taught. We're following the example of his disciples. So what went wrong? Well, what makes perfect sense in a Jewish context in the first century doesn't necessarily one-for-one correlate to the 21st century. And what we learned is that not everything in the pages of the scriptures is meant to be an example of what we're supposed to go out and do literally, but that the biblical authors have other agendas and other things they're trying to do in the stories they tell. So if this story here isn't telling you guys to strap on some sandals, head out to Saudi Daisy, try to couch surf as you share the gospel with people, then what is it trying to tell us? Well, I think there's a few things that are really important here. And one, I think, is something that you all here at Journey probably know well, because what it means to be a disciple in the first century and in the centuries that followed in the Hebraic tradition was that a select group of students would be chosen by a rabbi or would come under choose a rabbi to follow under. And that group of students, their whole purpose in life under their rabbi would be to be with him night and day, living life with him, soaking up his teachings, watching his example, to then become like him slowly over time through this life of discipleship so that they could go out and do what their rabbi had done. And it's the same with Jesus' disciples. Jesus calls his disciples to be with him, to become like him, and then to do what he does. So here in chapter 6, we get to kind of one of the first do moments of these disciples' lives. They've been with Jesus over the last few chapters. Slowly, hopefully, as they've been seeing him teach and seeing him perform miracles, they've been becoming like him. And now, here it is, kind of a test run or a trial run. It's almost like a scrimmage before a big game. The disciples are being sent out to have this trial run of going and doing what Jesus had been doing. They go as forerunners kind of to these surrounding villages to proclaim the same things that Jesus had been proclaiming and to do the same works that Jesus had been doing. Now, this was just kind of like I said, a scrimmage before the game, because they are going to go out, they are going to do this work, but they're also going to come back later, return to their rabbi, debrief the experience, share what happened, and probably get some more coaching and training from Jesus, because Jesus knows there's coming a time when it's not just going to be go out on this trip and come back, but it's going to be go. Because Jesus will not be there with them physically. His Spirit will be sending them out to go and do this full time. So Mark 6 is kind of like the first little test run of this mission, of kind of that go stage of discipleship. They've been with Jesus. They've slowly been becoming like him, and now they go and do the things that Jesus had been doing. So you might ask, what about some of these details? What about going out 2 by 2? Is that something that we should then, if I'm going to go to the grocery store this week, should I grab a friend to come with me, just in case we get an opportunity to share the gospel with someone? Or at my job, should I try to get one of my buddies hired to work with me so that we can be 2 by 2 in the workplace? Both of those things would be fine, but again, I don't think that's necessarily what Mark has in mind and why Jesus sent people out 2 by 2. I think it's a more Hebraic reason. When Jesus sends people 2 by 2, we know that the Torah says that if anyone's to be condemned for wrongdoing, there must be 2 or more witnesses. And what Jesus tells them as they go is that they're to proclaim these things, they're to do these things, but there's going to be some who reject them. And if that's the case, they're supposed to shake the dust off their feet and move on to the next place in condemnation against those who have rejected. But if it's only one witness or one testimony that's saying that this person or this village has rejected us, then it doesn't fit or abide by the laws of Torah. So it's a very Jewish thing of Jesus to say, hey, you need to go out 2 by 2 so that by the presence of 2 or more witnesses, Those who receive this message enter into the kingdom, but those who reject it, their condemnation is proven by 2 or more witnesses. So what about shaking the dust? That's culturally, we can tell that's not something we do. Again, this was a very Jewish practice. There were a lot of Jewish scholars and teachers when they would travel through Gentile lands on the way into the Promised Land or into their Jewish territory. Once they got out of the Gentile territory, they would shake the dust off their feet as a way of kind of removing the Gentile kind of stain from them as they enter back into God's holy land. So what's interesting here in this story, Jesus isn't saying to go to Gentile lands, but he's sending them out to these surrounding Jewish villages. Because what Jesus is showing, and what this shaking of the dust is kind of symbolizing, is that though these people may be descendants of Abraham, they've shown themselves to not be God's people. If they reject God's Messiah, if they reject the kingdom that's breaking into the earth now, then they've shown themselves that they aren't a part of God's family. But Jesus doesn't expect that everyone, that all Jews, or that every person in the villages they go to is going to get the dust shaken at them. Instead, he says that there are going to be some who welcome you in, and there's going to be some who reject. There's going to be some who receive the kingdom with gladness, and there's going to be some who don't believe it, who don't understand it, and want no part of it. A lot like Jesus' ministry that we've seen over the last few chapters. Remember, his teaching is, people are amazed and with awe at the authority of the ways he's taught and the things he said. People are compelled by the miracles and have their lives changed. But then his own neighbors and his hometown buddies reject him. There's a mix. There's those as God's people, as the disciples, go out to teach the things that Jesus has taught and to do the things that Jesus has done. There are going to be those who receive with joy as the kingdom of God is expanding. But on the flip side, the kingdom is announced in the context of rejection, opposition, and potentially even death. And that moves us from this portrait of the disciples who went ahead of Jesus, kind of in ministry, preparing the way for what Jesus is doing. Now we're going to turn to the other portrait. Because though the kingdom is expanding and going out, it's in the context of rejection, opposition, and even death. So we're going to look now at the next story, beginning, I didn't have any verse numbers, so that's my bad, but beginning with King Herod hearing about what's going on. And this is the first time Herod is kind of introduced into Mark's gospel account, and he hears about all that's going on with Jesus and with his followers, the miracles that are happening, and he's wondering, who is this? Who's doing all this? It's that question again that Mark kind of introduced at the beginning, that different characters have been asking and guessing at. We see it again here. King Herod asks, who is this? And different people in his court, his different officials and advisors, are all taking stabs at who it could be. It's important to know that Herod was kind of a puppet king propped up by the Roman occupiers to rule over the Galilee region. He wasn't actually a king. He didn't actually have that much authority. The authority he did have, he took and ran with it, but he had no true power, but was just a puppet under the Roman government. That being said, he did have some Jewish lineage, heritage, and background, so he kind of towed the line of being Jewish when it was convenient and when it served him and his purposes, but also very Roman or very Hellenized, with nothing to do with following Yahweh and his Torah, whenever it served him and led to more power, more wealth, more comfort. It's not a great character. And we're going to see he's actually kind of the first example we get of another ruler later on in the story who's going to act in very similar ways, not toward John the Baptist, but toward Jesus. So we have King Herod, this puppet ruler, who's wondering, who is Jesus? And his advisors come. And as kind of a Jewish council, they come up with some very good, like Jewish guesses at who this miracle worker, who this authoritative teacher could be. So some of them say it's John the Baptist, who was raised from the dead. If you know much about kind of Second Temple Judaism and the expectations swirling around about the Messiah's coming, there was this widespread thought that before the Messiah comes, the prophet Elijah is going to return. And a lot of people equated John the Baptist with the prophet Elijah, the one who makes straight the way of the Lord. So, in the Hebrew Bible, if you turn to the stories of Elijah, you see another prophet who comes after him, named Elisha. And Elijah was this great prophet, one of the best prophets of Israel's history. But Elisha, his disciple, receives a double portion of Elijah's spirit to do twice the miracles, have twice the power, and twice the impact that Elijah had. So when they're saying maybe John the Baptist was raised from the dead, they're thinking either John is resurrected and it's this Jesus character, or perhaps it's something like that Elijah-Elisha connection, where a double portion of John the Baptist's spirit is on this Jesus character. So all the things that John was doing, Jesus is doing twice as much. So that's one guess. The other guess is that, no, maybe this is actually Elijah. It wasn't John the Baptist who is the second Elijah, but this is him. I mean, think back to last chapter. We see Jesus raise Jairus' daughter who was dead. And it's in 1 Kings 17. There's a very similar story where the prophet Elijah raises a widow's son from the dead. And the people respond by at first laughing and confused, thinking that this person of God is crazy, and then being amazed at the miracle when the child that was once dead comes back to life. So they see these miracles. Wow, Jesus, just last chapter, seems to be doing exactly what the prophet Elijah did. So maybe he's Elijah, come back. So maybe this is the beginning of a messianic age. Again, all these things are also threats to King Herod and his power and rule, because if there is a Messiah and if there is a king of the Jews who's coming, this puts Herod's position on the outside and puts his reign coming to an imminent end. The third guess is kind of just in line with the other two. One of his advisors says, well, maybe he's a prophet like the other prophets. And again, if we go back to Torah, we see that in Deuteronomy there was these promises of a prophet like Moses who would come. There's going to be a new and greater Moses who came and brought a new Torah, not just teaching God's laws, but living them perfectly and putting them on display for all of Israel and for all the nations to see. So maybe he's a new John the Baptist, or at least a John the Baptist kind of 2.0. Maybe he's Elijah, finally come, bringing in the messianic age, or maybe he is that prophet like Moses, the greater prophet that we've been expecting. Any of these options don't sound good to Herod, and you see his response in the next verse. When Herod heard these things, he decides, this must be John the Baptist who I had beheaded. Interestingly, I think there's kind of two reasons why Herod assumes that this is the case. One, this is the least threatening to his power. Because if Elijah has come and the messianic age has kicked off, his power is coming to an end. If this is the prophet like Moses, the new and greater Moses, his power is coming to an end. But if this is just John the Baptist that he beheaded, come back to life, well, he's dealt with this problem before and he can do it again. So I think that's one motivation. I think the other motivation that you'll see in the text is that he has a lot of fear and superstition about all of this, both in the moment of John the Baptist's imprisonment and execution and now after the fact. So we'll keep reading. I don't want to read through all of this. There's a lot going on with this banquet, but I'm going to walk through it to kind of explain what's happening here. Because what happens here is this flashback back to when John was imprisoned and executed. So Jesus and his disciples are doing these miracles. Herod hears about it. He assumes this has to be John the Baptist come back to life. And then we get this story of how was John the Baptist killed and why would Herod be afraid of him coming back to life. And it all started when John, if we know anything about John, he's this fiery prophet of the Lord, very much in the lineage of the Hebrew prophets. We see him in the wilderness condemning unrighteousness, calling people to repentance. We see at the beginning of Mark's gospel that John is introduced as the voice crying out in the wilderness, who is preparing the way for the Messiah, making straight the path for his coming. So John the Baptist is the disciple, the one who went before Jesus preparing the way for Jesus' life and ministry. But we're also going to see that he's the one who went before and prepared the way for Jesus in his death and execution. So John comes and he decides that as a prophet of God, he needs to confront unrighteousness and wickedness no matter where it is, which leads him to the palace of King Herod. And we see him as a righteous accuser, accusing Herod of breaking Torah by having his brother's wife. So we see Philip's wife, Herodias. It's unlawful for Jews to marry their brother's spouse. But we see Herod, again, when it's convenient for him, he plays the Jew card. And when it's convenient for him, he plays the more Hellenistic kind of Roman card. So he saw what he wanted in Herodias and took her for himself. And John the Baptist is here to say, you've broken Torah. You are in opposition to God and his will, and this cannot stand. And we see Herodias' response to this. She's deeply offended, probably publicly shamed. So what she decides to do is she wants to find a way to get this man killed. But Herod is kind of interested in this John character. It says he's interested, he's perplexed, and he has like great joy when he hears him speak. So very similar to kind of what we'll see later in the story with Pilate and Jesus, where Pilate does have Jesus arrested, but he finds no grounds for charges against him and kind of finds him an intriguing character that he can't quite put his finger on why he's different, but he's intrigued and wants to hear more. And that's Herod's response to John. So he has him imprisoned, but he's not willing to go as far as to kill him, but rather wants to keep him around to keep hearing kind of what this crazy man from the wilderness has to say. But again, this isn't enough for Herodias. She wants vengeance. She wants to take revenge. And the perfect opportunity comes in the form of this banquet, which is on Herod's birthday. So this perfect banquet celebration, we have a king who at the banquet is enjoying himself with all of his officials and the leaders. And Herodias' daughter comes in and dances, which pleases the king when he sees the daughter. It pleases him actually so much that he goes on to offer her anything she wants, up to half his kingdom. This is really interesting. We don't have time to get into it. It would be a whole nother hour sermon. But this story has a ton of ties to the Esther story. We see this banquet. We see a king who's pleased by a young lady. We see the king offer to give anything up to half his kingdom. Interestingly, the Esther account and this account, they connect in a lot of ways, but all the characters are flipped. And everyone you would expect to be the good guy in the Esther story ends up kind of being the bad guy in this story, and vice versa. So I'm going to give you that as homework to work on for the week ahead. Look at Esther's accounts, look at this account, and see what God could have to teach us in the connections and in the contrasts. But we'll move on from there because we don't have time and continue with the account. At this banquet, the king says, I'll give you up to half my kingdom. Again, he's a puppet king. He actually doesn't really have a kingdom, nor does he have power to give half of this region of Roman territory over to this girl. Again, I think that's just intentional to connect you back to Esther. But the girl, she's kind of surprised. She wasn't planning for this, so she goes to her mom, who had a plan all along. And Herodias says, this is what you need to ask for, the head of John the Baptizer. So the girl goes back to the king. It says she immediately goes and makes haste. All of this like fast-paced language of everything that's happening here. This wasn't this long thought out plan, well crafted by Herod. It wasn't this long conspiracy going on by the Roman or the Jewish leaders. But instead it's these fast haste moments of kind of impulse decision and irrational, unthought through decisions with terrible outcomes. And that's what we see here. This girl rushes with haste immediately to Herod, asks for the head. Herod, of course, as we already know, he didn't want to put John to death. He was kind of interested and confused about this guy. But here he is in a weird position where he's offered up to half his kingdom. And all of those looking on are wondering, what's this girl going to ask for? What could be so valuable? Will she ask for half the kingdom, or will she ask for something else? When she asked for the head of John the Baptizer, now if Herod says no, one, he's kind of implicitly saying, this guy's life is worth more than half of my kingdom. And then two, he's kind of losing face and looking not so powerful, kind of embarrassing himself and shaming himself in front of all those who are there. So Herodias knows exactly what she's done. She's put Herod in an impossible situation where he has to go against his conscience in order to save face and to avoid shame. And that's exactly what Herod decides to do. Rather than standing up for righteousness and protecting the one who is calling out unrighteousness, he allows the vindictive woman to have her way and have the righteous accuser unrighteously executed. And that's what we see here. The executioner goes, beheads John the Baptist in prison, and then brings the head on a platter, giving it to the girl, who then goes and gives it to her mother. I said we had two portraits here of disciples that went before Jesus. And in the first one, we saw that as the disciples go out, teaching what Jesus taught, doing what Jesus did, the kingdom of God is expanding. But I said that's happening in the context of rejection, opposition, and possibly even death. In this story here, we're seeing that side of it. That although the kingdom has gone out, as people are teaching what Jesus taught and doing what Jesus did, it's also expanding in the context of rejection, opposition, and now death. You'll have to hold this in your mind for probably many weeks from now, but you're going to see a lot of similarities between Herod and John the Baptist here and Pilate and Jesus in Mark 15, where you're going to see a king who decides to, even against his own conscience, he decides to save face and avoid shame, pleasing people rather than pleasing God and doing what's right, as he gives over an innocent and righteous man to suffering and death by execution. There's a German theologian and pastor by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer who kind of famously coined this phrase, the cost of discipleship. So imagine John the Baptizer. He's been wrongfully imprisoned. He's sitting in a Roman prison, clinging to the promises of the scriptures, knowing that the Messiah has come in the person of Jesus, and knowing that soon, because of what the scriptures teach, the chains of the oppressor will be broken, doors of the prisons flung open, those who are captive will be released. A new age will dawn where the kingdom of heaven comes to be on earth, where the Messiah rules in righteousness, and where those who do unrighteousness and wickedness are judged once and for all. But then imagine the doubts and the disillusionment that would come when your chains are released, but it's not by the Messiah, but by an executioner who's flung open the prison doors, not to set you free and put you in a kingdom, but to take you to be beheaded. And instead of your head being lifted up in glory, your head's removed, given to a little girl to take to her mom. Jesus says that in this world you will have trouble. This is the cost of discipleship. John the Baptist, instead of being rewarded in the kingdom here on earth now as he thought with the Messiah there present, he'll receive his reward in the long line of prophets who have gone before him, who gave their lives, proclaiming God's righteousness in the face of unrighteousness. So instead of God's people being lifted up, once again we see them trampled by the oppressors. This is the cost of discipleship. But that's only one side of the story, and it's not the end of the story. The American philosopher, theologian, and teacher, Dallas Willard, much later coined a different phrase and in a different context. He talked about the cost of non-discipleship. Because although it looks like in this story that Herod and Herodias have had the last word and that they have won, and it's going to look like later in the story that Pilate and the Jewish leaders have all come out on top, what they don't know in the moment and what they can't understand is that there's coming a day when those who are first will be last, and the last will actually be made first. When all that is wrong will be made right. All that is wicked will be undone, and all the tears will be wiped away from those who mourn. When those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness will inherit the kingdom of God. Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. It's the cost of discipleship. But he goes on to say, take heart, for I have overcome the world. And though the cost of discipleship is great, and for here for John, it's cost him his very life, how much greater is the cost of non-discipleship? When the Messiah returns, when the new kingdom, the new age dawns and the kingdom comes on earth as it is in heaven, Jesus asked the famous question, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? I want to share just a little bit about my own family's life and story and how this, in a small way, we've gotten to live both the cost of discipleship and cost of non-discipleship from these stories. When it was about 2 years ago, almost to the day, we were serving in a country in North Africa that has a long history of being extremely hostile and unstable. There was a dictator ruling there for about 35 years who was a very militant Muslim leader. His commitment was that this country is going to be of one religion, Islam, one nationality, the Arabs, will speak one language, Arabic. And if you didn't fit in that category, you had two options. You could leave immediately or face death. And over the 35 years of his reign, there was multiple genocides. The church was heavily persecuted, forced underground. Many people were sent out as refugees to the surrounding countries. And for about 10 years, there weren't even foreigners really allowed in the country. So no missionary presence for a decade. But a few years ago, the country kind of opened back up as the dictator was overthrown and a new transitional government had been put in place. They were welcoming in foreigners. There wasn't as much hostility and opposition at the governmental level. And we were given the opportunity to be one of the first families back in after 10 years of no missionaries to get to be there, being a part of what God's doing in this new window that had opened. So we were there for about a year, and it was never easy living there. Extreme heat, extreme inconvenience, being a country that's not very well developed. So everything took 10 times as long and cost 10 times as much as you would expect from here in America. There were daily riots in the street due to the political turmoil. So what that meant is there would be people, usually anywhere from the age of about 6 to 16, throwing bricks and rocks at police while they responded by shooting tear gas at them. Almost every day, we would ride a rickshaw through our little village, and we'd be covering our 2-year-old and our 1-year-old's faces, while my wife and I's eyes and throats would be burning from the tear gas clouds that we had to drive through just to get to work or to the store or out to visit friends. But that was kind of the cost of discipleship there, the cost of being there to do what Jesus had called us to do. And we knew for us that was kind of the worst part of it, but for those that we were ministering to, they faced a much more severe cost, because the penalty for becoming a Christian in that country was death. Either that you would experience directly from your family, or if your family didn't want to or was unable to carry it out, the surrounding community was responsible for it. And if that failed, or if the person fled, then the local government or the national government saw it as their religious obligation to execute any who would change religions or convert away from Islam. But we had the privilege, the joy, and the honor of meeting with people like this, getting to encourage and disciple and be discipled by them. I partnered with local pastors kind of in the underground church, doing Bible teaching and helping them to go out and to reach people with the gospel. And we got to share with people who had never heard the gospel before. But about 2 years ago, I think next week it'll be 2 years exactly, my wife was driving downtown one day, and a tank pulled in front of her. She was going to cross the bridge to get to the capital city, and she was told, "You can't cross this bridge. You're not allowed to come across here today." If we were anywhere else in the world, we would say, "Okay, this is a bad thing. I need to get back to my house immediately." But here it was just another day. This wasn't uncommon. So my wife was like, "I have errands to do. I have a plan for the day. I'm going to go to the other bridge to go downtown." So she starts trying to drive to the other bridge to get to the city. And that's when she hears the news that there's been shooting downtown and all the bridges have been closed. So fighting through standstill traffic of thousands of confused people, she eventually makes it back to our apartment, where we learned that within the hour, not only had there been shooting, but the airport had been bombed. The two different factions of the military had started an all-out war with each other, and civil war had broken out in our country. Over the next 2 weeks, me, my 5-month pregnant wife, and our 3-year-old son and our almost 2-year-old son were hunkered down in our apartment as shootings happened throughout our city. Bombs would drop, shaking our windows. We were all kind of in the middle of our apartment in our living room, just trying to last day to day. There was a point in that time where we started to wonder and really think that this could be the end for us. This was the cost of discipleship. All of our friends had left the city and found ways out of the country. Because of where we lived, we were caught kind of on the wrong side of the city, where all of the big evacuations were happening on the east side. Between us and them was the center of the war, where the fighting was the heaviest. So we knew we had no chance of getting out. by any evacuation or convoy. Thankfully, it didn't end up how we kind of had feared and thought, but God had another plan, and through the prayers of people all over the world, after 2 weeks of trying to find a way out, we were able to get the last seats on an overcrowded bus to take a 16-hour bus ride in 110-degree heat to make it to the border, where we stayed 3 days, both in a internally displaced people's camp and in the home of just a generous and hospitable family, trying to find a way to get across the border. And at the end of April, we were able to make it into the neighboring country safely. We were exhausted, dehydrated, tired, overheated, but we were alive and we were safe. And as great as that cost of discipleship was in that moment, and it kind of continues to be as we continue to recover and move forward after the trauma of that event, I think this text and the biblical story invites us to ask how much greater would the cost of non-discipleship had been. Because we'll never know the impact of that year in Sudan. The conversations we had, the way we could see the faces light up of brothers and sisters who were encouraged in a life and work that was extremely difficult. People getting to hear about Jesus for the first time. We have no idea what God will do with all of that. But we trust that he's going to take that ministry much further and much deeper than we could ever imagine. And what may seem like a small seed to us, I think is going to be a big tree in God's eyes. So we see in this story of John the Baptizer that the kingdom is announced in the context of opposition, rejection, and potentially even death. But we know that as disciples of Jesus go out teaching what Jesus taught and doing what Jesus did, that the kingdom is expanding. So what is all this? What do these two portraits here in this text mean for us today? Well, I think there's a lot that we have to learn from these examples. A lot to motivate and encourage us to go out into our workplaces, into our homes, into our neighborhoods, our communities, to go and to teach the things that Jesus taught and do the things that Jesus did. But in doing so, we shouldn't expect that everything will just work out great. Everyone we talk to is going to want to follow Jesus and become a member here. Instead, we need to remember John's example and his testimony. That as we proclaim righteousness and as we share the kingdom, it's going to be met with rejection. It's going to be met with opposition. And it might even be met with death. Now, just like I said, I don't expect anyone to go couch surfing in the towns next door. I also don't expect anyone to leave from here and then suddenly get arrested and potentially executed because you were calling out some unrighteousness in the local government. We live in a different context, a different day and age, a different side of the world. But I think these examples do mean a lot for us in what it means to be disciples here and now in Chattanooga, at Journey Church, and as we go out into the city, into the world. It would be probably extremely presumptive of me to tell each of you how exactly to apply this text, what it means for you in your life. I couldn't possibly know the best ways for you to go out and teach what Jesus taught, or the best ways for you to go out and do what Jesus did. I also don't know, I can't foretell or prophesy about the hardships you're going to face and the rejection that's ahead. But what I can offer is just some encouragement that as you go out with your roommates, your family, your coworkers, your community, there's going to be opportunities as disciples of Jesus to be with Jesus, become like him, and do what he did, to go out and teach what he taught, to do what he did, to live how he lived. And when you face opposition and when things are extremely difficult and hard, is when we, like John the Baptizer, cling to those promises of Scripture that may not be fulfilled today and may not even be fulfilled in our lifetime. But the life of faith, so much more than just believing all the right things every day, is looking forward to when God makes all things right at the end of days. I'll share a little bit, I guess, about my own, our family's kind of application of this and how God has called us in this time. But please see this as just one example, because if everyone in this room went out and did campus ministry, there'd be no one left here to be at Journey Church serving a community that really needs it. But as one example of how God has led our family to follow in the footsteps of those who went before him and to now, as disciples, go after Jesus is what we're doing now with Impact Campus Ministries. So God called us back to the States. After we came out of that war, we spent about another year overseas in North Africa, working with the war victims who were coming out, doing trauma counseling and kind of humanitarian aid, as well as discipleship and theological education. But it became very clear back in August of this last year that God was bringing us back to the U.S., and we came back here to transition out of international ministry and into campus ministry. Like you all who know about the BEMA podcast, I stumbled upon BEMA back in 2020, and I have two master's degrees from a seminary, so I've had a lot of theological education and found BEMA to be, one, a lot of affirmation and review of a lot of what I have learned, but two, in a lot of ways, even better than what I had paid a lot of thousands of dollars for to get a master's degree in. And when I found BEMA, I learned so much, was so challenged. It really helped me and my family in our discipleship. So I thought, if God ever brings us back to the U.S., I would love to look at Impact, which is kind of BEMA's parent organization. Because if people at Impact are teaching this kind of curriculum to college students, I want to be a part of that. Knowing that college freshman Becker used to just take a text and say, okay, this is what I need to do, and go out without a wallet or phone and get in a bad situation. I wanted to help people avoid those kind of mistakes and understand, how do we read the text in context in order to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did? How could I help college students to, in a time where so many people walk away from the faith and leave the church, how could I help people fall in love with Jesus, understand their Bible, and not see it as this ancient, confusing text, not see it as this rule book of all these things I'm supposed to do but really don't want to, but to see it as this living and active dialogue where we get to see and hear the voice of God and see it transform and shape us. So I thought, I'll look into Impact. It'd be amazing if they had an opportunity. I didn't know anything about Impact at the time, besides that they do the BEMA podcast, they teach the Bible. I want to be a part of this. And we found this opportunity at the University of Utah, and the reason that one stuck out to us is because at Utah they have a huge international ministry where Impact is serving international students. There's more than 4,000 international students at the University of Utah from over 100 different countries. But God has kind of brought Impact and the international student department together a few years ago, and now kind of one of the primary ministries that goes on with Impact is their international outreach and discipleship. And they've been wanting to bring someone in to kind of fill that role and lead out in that ministry. And we were, on paper, kind of a perfect fit. It seemed like exactly what we had wanted to do, what we'd been praying about doing. We could continue doing international ministry, but we could do it on campus where there's people from all over coming for such a short but pivotal time in their lives when they're deciding who they're going to be, what they're going to believe, and what they're going to do with their lives. So it seemed like a no-brainer to my family. We spent some weeks or months praying and fasting and talking about it before applying. When we applied, we learned that it was these positions don't just come with a salary or a paycheck, but everyone from the president of Impact, Marty Solomon, down to just the semester intern, everyone with Impact is able to live and do their ministry by the support of other believers and other churches who see this as something worth supporting, see it as a ministry worth investing in, and who decide they want to be a part of it. So the idea of support raising was a little daunting to us. We were already trying to get our heads around potentially moving to Utah. I'm from Colorado, so I'm kind of out there, but all of our friends and family are more on this part of the U.S., especially for my wife's family, kind of born and raised in this area. The thought of moving out west somewhere as far, it's about 28 hours from here to Salt Lake City. When you contrast it with North Africa, it's not that far. But we've gotten a little spoiled being back here since August, so now it's a little more bittersweet to think about leaving. But as hard as that was already to get our heads wrapped around, the idea of also support raising, when we were already kind of in a very transient, uncertain, kind of post-traumatic time after the war, we were like, I don't know if our family has it in us to support raise. I don't know if this is the job for us. So we kind of kept putting it off for weeks or months, kept praying about it, but kept looking into other things. And it just became clear from when we first applied and reached out until around October that this is what, if we get the job offer and get the opportunity, this is what we want to give our lives to, and we can't imagine doing anything else. So we took a trip out to Salt Lake City in November, met the family with Impact there who's doing ministry. He's been there for 17 years doing ministry on campus, and the trip just went as well as we could have hoped or prayed. So we accepted the position in December and then started full-time support raising in January, right with the new year. So that was about 3 months ago. We have raised 80% of our support thus far, which is huge. They say it usually takes 9 to 12 months to get fully funded. We told Impact, we'd really love to do it in 5 so that we could move over the summer and start ministry in the fall. And they said, that's really ambitious, but it's not unrealistic, so let's pray for 5. And then how God has responded and what he's done over the last 3 months has just kind of continually both blown my wife and I's minds and exceeded any hope or expectation we had. But every other week I talk with the Impact staff to kind of go over how things are going. And he told me last week, there's never before has every time he checks someone's donor account, the number goes up. He's like, since you guys started support raising in January, I've never seen it stagnant. It goes up every week. And the staff there has been so encouraged, which has just given a lot of more confirmation or affirmation of, yes, we are doing what God wants us to do, and he is showing us that clearly. So that, for our family, when we look at these disciples who went before Jesus, preparing the way for him in ministry and preparing the way for his death, for my family, what it looks like for us to go after Jesus is now to go and give our lives to do campus ministry, to work with students, to teach the Bible, to share the gospel. And our kind of whole goal with it is I want to see people come to faith in Jesus. I want to see people grow in their faith in Jesus. And I want to see people take their faith and share it out on campus and out into the world. Again, not everyone in this room should do campus ministry. I would love it if God moved everyone in this room to support us in this campus ministry. That would be great for us, but I don't expect that, and I definitely don't want that to be on your minds of, this isn't a bait and switch, and I'm not here to give a quick message so that I can get your support. Not at all. I would love it if everyone supported, but if everyone supported me and what God's doing with Impact, then there'd be a whole lot of other ministries, a whole lot of other opportunities here in this city and around the world that wouldn't get your support or wouldn't get your investment. So really, when Mark asked me if I would be interested in sharing and teaching, I wanted to be able to offer the invitation to share about what we're doing in light of this text today. And just ask you to consider it, pray about it. We're going to be around, I guess, whenever I finally wrap up and pray. And it would mean the world to us if you just came and said hi, introduced yourself. We do send out a regular newsletter. So if this sounds like something that God would want you to be supporting through prayer and be staying caught up with as we move out there and do ministry, then please come and see us, get us your email so we can make sure you start getting those updates. I have a little paper with me that shares about the ministry, a little bit about our family, and has kind of the financial information so that if this is something that, if you're in the room and think, this is something God wants me to support, then again, please come say hi. I'd love to give you that paper and answer any questions you have. But again, one of my favorite things in the world to do is to be in a room with people talking about the Bible. So mission accomplished. If Impact sounds like something you want to be a part of, please come and talk to me. We would love it. But know that my teaching and what I've shared today is not the definitive word on Mark 6, but it's just the starting point. And my invitation for you all in the week ahead is, one, go check out Esther, find some connections. But more importantly, continue this conversation in your house or with your roommates or your friends or in your communities, in your discussion groups. And pray and talk together about what could this look like for us as the disciples who go after Jesus. What does it look like to follow in these examples, knowing the cost of discipleship and the cost of non-discipleship, but tasked with the hard, the scary, but the most important work in the world, teaching what Jesus taught, doing what Jesus did, by the power of his Spirit working through us. Nothing of our own intellect, nothing of our own ability. God's the one who started the work, and God's the one who continues the work. And how might he continue it, both in you and through you? So thank you all so much for letting me talk for probably a little too long. I hope and pray that in some way it was a gift to you all. And it's, again, the honor and privilege of a lifetime anytime I ever get to do this. So thank you. I'm going to pray, and then I don't know what's next, but